Custine und die Erstürmung Frankfurts am Main durch die Hessen im Jahre 1792 von Georg Ludwig Kriegk. Custine and the Hessian storming of Frankfurt am Main in 1792 by Georg Ludwig Kriegk. It's apparent that the recounting of Hesse and Frankfurt's history has been revisited multiple times, yet it holds significance for two reasons. Firstly, it's a narrative steeped in the commendable actions of the people and the city of Frankfurt, shedding light on lesser-known contributions. I've drawn from existing accounts, particularly the memoirs of Freiherrn von Dittfurth, Cassel, 1864, and excerpts from a prior publication titled The Storming of Frankfurt by the Hessians on December 2, 1792, Cassel, 1843, 2nd edition. The backdrop of August 1792 marked the initiation of the war between France, Austria, and Prussia, with Imperial Germany initially uninvolved. However, the Landgrave of Hesse-Cassel, aligned with Prussia, deployed a corps of 6,000 soldiers. By September 20th, the tides of this war shifted unfavorably for the Germans during the renowned cannonade at Valmy. Subsequently, a series of events prompted their eventual withdrawal. This retreat commenced in September, and on October 24th, news of the French's unexpected encroachment on the fortress of Mainz reached the German headquarters. This spurred a swift mobilization of relief forces to safeguard the Prussian treasures amassed in Koblenz, leading to the Prussian advance guard from Hesse reaching Koblenz on the evening of October 25th. It appears that after the German forces withdrew, the French diverted their attention from Landau to capture the significant Austrian magazine in Speyer. Initially guarded by 7,000 Austrians and 2,000 Mainz troops, this strategic point saw a reduction in its defenders to about 3,000 on September 11th due to a summons for the siege of Thionville. Seizing the opportunity, the French dispatched General Custine with roughly 18,000 troops to attack Speyer on September 29th. Custine swiftly took control of Speyer, its local magazine, and the town of Worms. However, upon hearing false rumors about the imminent arrival of German troops, Custine opted to retreat momentarily. Yet, in mid-October, Custine reassembled his forces, aiming to surprise Mainz. Despite being a significant fortress of the German Empire with ample supplies and 193 guns, Mainz lacked the necessary substantial occupation. It could have easily withstood the feeble Custine Corps, which was equipped only with field guards. However, fear and timidity among civil government figures and military leaders weakened its defenses. On October 19th, after a few sporadic shots, Custine demanded the surrender of the fortress. Tragically, by the same day, Mainz declared its readiness for capitulation, which was finalized in the early hours of October 21st. This swift surrender led to the immediate arrival of the French forces at Mainz. On that very day, Custine dispatched 2,000 troops toward the city of Frankfurt. These forces marched through the night, dividing into two detachments. One of the smaller units, led by Colonel Jean-Nicolas Houchard, with around 500 men, moved to the right, while the other, consisting of about 1,500 soldiers under Joseph Victorin Neuwinger, advanced on the left side of the main river. The vanguard of these troops arrived at Frankfurt on the 22nd of October at daybreak. They set up camp in the fields in front of the Bockenheimer Gate, an area still predominantly agricultural at that time. Their cannons were aimed toward this gate, where the drawbridge was being raised in preparation for defense. Immediately the council, reconvening after the news of Mainz's capitulation the previous day, assembled once more. Their meeting extended throughout the day and into the night. Their foremost action was to dispatch a delegation to Houchard, seeking clarification regarding the purpose of his force's appearance. Houchard's response indicated that he was anticipating additional troops and requested nothing beyond provisions, food and firewood for cooking, to be procured against payment. Both supplies were sent out by noon in response to his request. Many locals, intrigued by the unexpected presence of these guests, ventured to witness the peculiar scene unfolding. Some headed to the town hall, while others flocked through the narrow gate of the main town gate, specially opened for pedestrians. However, the French authorities swiftly dispatched several officers into the city with a mission to locate and apprehend French aristocrats. Accompanied by council members, these officers proceeded to various inns where they detained 3 individuals, escorting them back to the encampment as prisoners. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Neuwinger's troops arrived in front of Sachsenhausen. Deputy councillors promptly approached them to address the situation. Neuwinger claimed to possess a missive from General Custine directed to the council. When requested to deliver it to the deputies, he insisted on personally presenting the written communication, alongside his assembled troops, to the councillors. Despite the deputies' pleas invoking Frankfurt's neutrality, which forbade the entry of troops, Neuwinger remained resolute. Finding no success, the deputy returned through the city gate and raised the drawbridge in front of the soldiers. However, the French promptly positioned cannons toward the gate. Faced with this threat, the deputies retracted, lowering the bridge and opening the door. Yet, resistance was futile, given the unexpected attack. Preparations needed to be made under the unforeseen circumstances. As the French marched forward with resounding music and the spirited cry of "Vive la liberté" echoing both across the river and into the heart of the city, they swiftly found lodging with the locals. Both the inhabitants and the French soldiers initially perceived this as merely a transient passage through Hesse. Given that many soldiers in this corps were veterans and fluent in German, an immediate kinship formed between them and the locals. A sense of camaraderie developed, fostering a friendly rapport between the 2 factions. Moreover, the conduct of the troops was commendable. They maintained respectful interactions with the citizens, except for their apparent lack of cleanliness and their robust affirmation of their republic and military prowess. Importantly, they diligently paid for all their provisions from the residents, including services rendered by barbers, bakers, butchers, and shopkeepers. Neuwinger issued a decree 3 days following their entry, emphasizing the strict prohibition against any French soldier violating the sanctity of property rights, a mandate aimed at preserving the utmost respect for the citizens' belongings. Their cannons were stationed at the Rossmarkt, while their horses were positioned in what is now the Goethe Square, marking the French presence within the city. From the outset, the residents harboured little belief in the French's hostile intentions, positioning themselves on the ramparts and streets. However, their hopes were swiftly dashed on the very first day. It became evident that Custine, upon situating a portion of his troops across the Rhine, had primarily aimed at plundering the city. Neuwinger, having established his quarters in the Red House, which stands as the present post office on the Ziel, wasted no time and immediately presented the council with a letter dated October 21st, penned in a rather crude manner. The letter insinuated that Frankfurt's sheltering of French emigrants displayed blatant favoritism, hence obliging General Custine to demand a substantial payment from the inhabitants. Neuwinger was tasked with specifying the precise amount, also entrusted to seize the funds that Austria and Prussia had deposited in Frankfurt. The letter concluded with a demand for a payment which, according to Neuwinger's explanation, was estimated at 2 million guilders, to be settled by noon on the following day, at the latest. The rationale behind this exorbitant demand was justified by the enormous costs of the war waged against their most formidable enemies. Following this extraordinary demand, the council promptly dispatched a delegation to Custine in an attempt to avert the situation and secure funds urgently for this critical juncture. Given the absence of surplus cash in the city treasury, the requested amount was to be garnered through a voluntary loan at a 4% interest rate. A printed appeal was circulated, calling upon bakers, merchants, and all citizens to contribute their resources to the Calculation Office, a municipal finance authority, by the following day. Throughout the night of October 22nd, messengers travelled door to door with this plea, resulting in an anticipated success. Citizens began arriving early in the morning, so much so that those tasked with receiving the contributions sought additional assistance to manage the influx of funds. Craftsmen were notably well represented among the contributors, and even impoverished peasants brought forth their savings. Some, in a display of immense generosity, chose to waive any interest on their offerings. An impoverished widow notably contributed an annual sum of 1 florin and 40 kreuzers, fulfilling not only the due portion from her treasury, but also prepaying for the following year. At that time, emotions ran high, and there was a palpable tension regarding the French presence, leading to fears of a potential uprising against them. Sensing the urgency, on October 23rd, the Council issued a manifesto appealing to the citizens to retain control over their sentiments and refrain from any hostile actions against the French soldiers. Simultaneously, the Council assured the public that no contributions had been given yet, emphasizing that diligent negotiations were underway. There was hope that the misunderstanding behind the demand could be resolved. In response to this pressing situation, a letter was drafted on the evening of October 22nd, addressed to Custine, seeking the withdrawal of the contributions. Subsequently, on the following day, deputies, including Chef von Humbracht, Senator Dr. Moors, and Syndicus Sieger, were dispatched to Mainz. Their mission was to express the Council's profound astonishment at the demand made. They clarified that the stated reason for the demand, supporting French emigrants, did not align with Frankfurt's actions, as the city's authorities had not tolerated any arming of emigrants. Therefore, they implored Custine to consider their plea and withdraw the demand for contributions. In addition to presenting their letter, the deputies submitted a comprehensive list of decrees issued by the Council concerning French emigrants since May 1791. These decrees showcased Frankfurt's stance, evident in their refusal of Count d'Artois' plea to acquire municipal cannons and their resolute action against repeated attempts to enlist soldiers within Frankfurt's boundaries. Upon the deputies' return from Mainz on October 24th, it was revealed that Neuwinger had mandated a German proclamation a day earlier. When the Council declined to comply, it was forcefully proclaimed through drumbeats and circulated in print. The contents were not intended for all citizens, but specifically targeted Frankfurt's patricians, ecclesiastical, electoral, princely, noble, and aristocratic properties within the city. In response to the letters from the Council deputies, Custine issued a written statement along with the files sent to him. He contested Frankfurt's purported non-involvement in the affairs concerning French emigrants. According to Custine, the numerous prohibitions against the stationing of troops within the city were proof of Frankfurt's active participation. He argued that these prohibitions were not voluntarily implemented but were a result of the Emperor's directive to expel the emigrants. The articles, which were hostile to France, of the newspapers published under censorship in the city, also showed the attitude that had been animated in Frankfurt. The Council should therefore look at its error and join a revolution that would restore the people to their old rights. Their revenge will be felt only by the traitors, and the cost of the war will be directed only to the instigators and beneficiaries. Despite the injustice committed by the Frankfurt Council, the French nation granted an allowance of 500,000 to the demanded contribution. Still, the Council should be confident with the payment. Since Neuwinger had now threatened to take up compulsory measures, which were to be carried out with fire and sword, the inhabitants became so terrified that the magistrate was persuaded to pay contributions to appease the threat. Accordingly, on the 24th of October, he ordered General Neuwinger to pay 300,000 francs, but with the explanation that this payment, as well as all the rest, was to be regarded as a deposit given to the French nation. The letter sent, accompanied by an elaborate explanation, aimed to highlight a critical point to General Custine. The demand for contributions, targeted only at the affluent and nobility, couldn't be met without imposing an unjust burden on every citizen, including those belonging to the town's commoners. This assertion was rooted in a fundamental misconception held by the French generals regarding the structure of Frankfurt's city constitution. The city's constitution was built on principles that didn't differentiate between estates or rights. It upheld equality among all citizens and mandated that they bear collective responsibilities in accordance with their means. Consequently, the city court lacked the legal framework to sanction the payment of such contributions. Additionally, no exceptions could be made that disadvantaged individual citizens, even if they willingly paid the demanded sum. The situation became more complex when it concerned the possessions of princes, counts, and religious entities within the city's territory. These holdings were not sizable enough to facilitate a payment of 1.5 million. Furthermore, the proprietors of these properties couldn't be compelled by the magistrate to make such contributions. Adding to the bewilderment was the contradiction in the earlier assurances. Initially, Custine's neutral stance was conveyed as not indicative of hostility. Even the French troops within the city, who were not perceived as enemies and had been welcomed as comrades, were taken aback by the notion that Frankfurt was being treated unfavorably. This inconsistency left everyone surprised and perplexed. The second deputation delivered this letter to General Custine on October 24th. Its impact was notable, as Custine subsequently made a proclamation in German, clarifying that the demand for contributions was not intended for the less affluent citizens. He emphasized that General Neuwinger should refrain from assessing the funds based on guilds or the wealth of the citizens. In response, Custine provided a written explanation, stating that the people of Frankfurt hadn't offended the French nation by supporting the emigrants, despite the distorted claims of the time. He criticized General Neuwinger for unjustly making the people pay. Custine also made a striking observation, mentioning that the aristocracy of the wealthy was particularly dreadful, as they shifted public burdens onto the poor, an action that had sparked the revolution in France and, he believed, could incite similar consequences in Germany. During this time, Custine made a request to the council, seeking the loan of 24-pounders and their ammunition from the Frankfurt arsenal to fortify the conquest made by the French Republic. Additionally, while he reiterated the demand for 500,000, he specified that this payment was to be solely borne by the poorer class. In response, the council once again tried to reason with Custine through a letter, emphasizing that Frankfurt hadn't violated its neutrality in any way. They explained that the city's acceptance of emigrants was purely an act of private hospitality, not a breach of neutrality. They also highlighted that other cities like Mannheim and Heidelberg had offered similar hospitality to a greater extent, without causing any shift in the French Republic's friendly behavior towards the Palatine court. The dealings of individual Frankfurt households with the emigrants were influenced by foreign powers and remained beyond the knowledge of the magistrate. The funds involved in these transactions didn't originate from France, as the national treasury in France had received cash from Frankfurt. Claims suggesting that Frankfurt merchants circulated false assignats were proven to be untrue. The city hadn't yet contemplated redistributing the required sum of contributions among the bourgeoisie. Instead, an interest-bearing loan was requested from the inhabitants, with no intention to burden the disadvantaged class. Lastly, it was emphasized that the city's inviolable neutrality and its allegiance to the German Empire prevented the lending of Frankfurt's guns and ammunition to the French army. The letter dispatched to Mainz on October 26th marked a pivotal moment. Simultaneously, Neuwinger persisted in demanding an immediate additional payment of contributions. Despite attempts to stall for a response to the letter sent to Mainz, Neuwinger was resolute, threatening immediate forced exertions if payment was not forthcoming on the same day. Consequently, a further 150,000 francs were tendered late in the evening. However, this payment was made with a clear declaration that no further sums would be forthcoming until Custine agreed to specific terms vital for the city's safety and relief in the form of a formal capitulation. In furtherance of this, municipal deputies were scheduled to depart the following day for Mainz. By October 27th, Custine unexpectedly appeared in Frankfurt, leading 1,500 fresh troops and deploying heavy artillery. This unanticipated arrival startled the French garrison, prompting rumours among the troops that the Hessians and Austrians were at the city gates. General Marsch's retreat further fueled this speculation. Custine took advantage of this moment, circulating a German proclamation throughout the city. It read, "Citizens, the French Constitution stands to protect the impoverished, aiming to curb the oppression imposed by the affluent. I am informed, citizens, that the bankers and merchants conspired with our adversaries to siphon good coin from France and issued misleading assignats. They sought to impose the weight of your people's share based on the arrogance of the wealthy, proportional to their property. However, those who possess less than 30,000 florins in funds are exempt from this obligation. If anyone in this category has already contributed, their payment shall be reimbursed. I have arrived in Germany to offer the alliance of the Frankish Republic to the people, showcasing that liberated French citizens seek only to champion the vulnerable. We aim to persuade the unjustly enriched that individuals, born with equal rights, should not bear the yoke of the affluent. Frank citizen, General of the armies, Custine." The atmosphere grew tense as Custine, accompanied by his retinue of 10 to 12 aides, swiftly made his way from the Red House to the Rossmarkt, where troops were stationed within the city. His sudden appearance instilled fear among the citizens, who worried that the soldiers might receive orders to plunder. In response, some 40 young butchers, each accompanied by their dogs, mobilized themselves in a defensive stance. They shadowed General Custine, ready to counter any hostile commands and, if necessary, take action against him. Eventually, Custine halted at the headguard near the horse market. Addressing the gathering crowds in German, he demanded, "Have you seen the Kaiser lately?" referencing the imperial coronation that took place in Frankfurt in July 1792. Few voices in the crowd affirmed, "Yes." To this, Custine retorted, "Well, you won't see him anymore." Custine, having used similar rhetoric in Mainz with a lively response from the locals, anticipated a similar reaction in Frankfurt. However, his words were met with indifference, causing him evident displeasure. Determined to showcase his authority, he rode alongside his retinue to the Bockenheimer Gate, leading the new troops to the Rossmarkt, a pivotal location in Frankfurt since October 22nd. Despite the amicable relations between the troops and the citizens, Custine was irked by the lack of enthusiasm among the locals and openly criticized them, even labeling some as traitors. Swiftly taking action, he directed the new troops to replace the old ones stationed at the Rossmarkt, while the displaced troops were ordered to depart from the city towards the eastern outskirts of Frankfurt. The atmosphere among the citizens grew tense with the fear of potential looting and uncertainty regarding Custine's intentions. Custine's presence around the Römer, where the council and bourgeois assemblies convened, kept the city in a state of anxious anticipation throughout the night. However, contrary to their fears of an imminent threat, Custine had a different objective in mind: extracting funds from the city. Despite the anxiety, Custine was prompted with an alternative proposition, a proposed capitulation offered by a delegation comprising Syndical Sieger and 2 members from the bourgeois assemblies, Friedrich Schmidt and Wenner. This proposal had been dispatched to Mainz earlier on October 27th. The delegation's attempt to convey the offer was unsuccessful as it missed Custine along the way. The proposed solution involved paying 1 million francs within a fortnight, deducting the amounts already paid and the expenses incurred, thereby absolving Frankfurt and its inhabitants from further obligations. Additionally, it required the withdrawal of troops within 24 hours following the security confirmation for the specified sum, and the French National Convention was to oversee the reimbursement of the contribution. However, this offer, which would only have contributed a fraction of the required funds to Custine's war chest, fell significantly short of the initial demand for 2 million guilders. On the evening of October 27th, Custine resorted to a drastic measure to compel payment. He detained 7 esteemed merchants, including bankers Johann Jakob Willemer, Bethmann Hollweg, and Heinrich Gontard, alongside merchants Franz Schweitzer, Joachim Elias Ehrmann, Peter Anton Brentano's son, and Isaac Michael Speyer, the latter being of Jewish descent, holding them hostage until the contribution was provided. The situation escalated further when Willemer, who was a senator, was summoned from the council chamber and released while another merchant, Joachim Heinrich Catoir, was arrested in his place. This decision might have stemmed from Willemer's suspected affiliation as a Prussian agent. The French Republic was keen on swaying Prussia away from its alliance with Austria and towards their interests. Willemer emerged from his senatorial duties 4 weeks later, finding no support from his colleagues for his release. Shortly after the arrest of these 7 citizens, and again the following morning, Custine reiterated his demand. He stated that the delayed payment of the contribution had caused him to waive the initial 2 million guilders. He pressed for this sum to be paid promptly, assuring that violence was unnecessary as he held the prominent hostages. However, he threatened that if the contribution remained unpaid within 4 hours, he would transport the hostages to France. Furthermore, he demanded the surrender of the city's 24-pounder cannon. The attempts to negotiate a resolution were met with adamant refusal from Custine. Even when presented with a letter offering 2 million francs, minus the natural supplies cost, he rejected the proposal outright. His curt response, conveyed through his secretary, expressed his sole intention: "I will not write, I will have money." Custine demanded the provision of quarters, supplies, and various necessities due to the ongoing war. However, concerning the surrender of the 24-pounder cannon, the city cited its commitment to neutrality and could not comply. In response to the council's efforts to advise caution, Custine emphasized that any delay had worsened the situation. He warned that unless the 2 million were paid promptly, he would escalate his demands. Custine's written response carried a stark message. Only the affluent citizens would be impacted. He asserted his determination to remain in Frankfurt, aiming to showcase his military prowess to the magistrate, compelling them to relinquish hope. On the other hand, he intended to demonstrate that French troops stationed there would challenge the enemy and assert the Republic's recognition. He clarified that France did not harbour ambitions to conquer Germany. Instead, the Republic sought to fortify peace and enlighten the reigning despotic rulers of the German Empire with reason and philosophy. This strategic plan was firmly rooted in France's war philosophy, indicating an unyielding commitment until a staggering toll of 25 million French lives was lost and cities and farmlands lay in ruin. Custine urged the Frankfurt magistrate to relinquish their fanciful notions, consent to the demand for the 2 million, and promptly align with France. He emphasized a unity of minds that should be unassailable by any force in the world. The tone and content of that letter were shocking, lacking any logical coherence and showcasing a blatant ignorance of the German imperial structure. It was evident that the sole intent behind such clumsy phrasing was the extortion of a considerable sum of money. Realizing the true nature of Custine's demand, the council could no longer be misled. Consequently, on October 28th, as the liberation of the hostages took place, they scrambled to gather as much money as possible. By 11 o'clock in the evening, they managed to amass a total of 2 million francs, not gulden. On October 29th, they informed General Custine of this amount, promising to exert all efforts to collect the rest within the first month after deducting the costs of necessary supplies. The negotiation for the 2nd million unfolded with Custine pressing for the full sum, while offering a staggered payment plan. He agreed to the gradual settlement of the 2nd million, half within 6 months, and the remaining portion within 10 months. Moreover, he acknowledged the deductions made from previous deliveries, pledged the release of the hostages and committed to directing the second million to the National Convention. However, Custine remained firm about Frankfurt's future, declining to discuss the evacuation of troops, but expressing interest in implementing protective measures, like the Salvaguardia, that would ensure ongoing contributions and deliveries. His approach extended beyond Frankfurt, as he sought to propagate the revolution in the German Rhineland through proclamations and imposing heavy taxes on the conquered territories. On October 3rd, Custine returned to Mainz, and by the 31st, various payments completed the delivery of 1 million florins. General Novinger then freed the hostages on October 7th. Subsequently, on November 1st, a delegation was dispatched to Custine, conveying the Council's instructions regarding the second million and urging that the National Convention guarantee the reimbursement of the first million as a safeguard. Responding to this, Custine addressed only the latter request by issuing a letter of protection on November 2nd. This directive ordered all French commanders, soldiers, and citizens to safeguard the citizens of Frankfurt and their possessions. Additionally, Custine promised to approach the National Convention, proposing that Frankfurt, throughout the entire duration of the war, be spared from further contributions, except those already imposed. To address the matter of the second million and restitution, on November 4th, Syndicus Sieger and merchant Gottlieb Engelbach were sent as deputies to Paris. Later, judges and members of the city council, such as Gunderode, merchants Peter Clemens Müller and Johann Heinrich Jordis, were also dispatched to Paris. Their stay in Paris lasted nearly 3 months. The events that unfolded were distressing and chaotic. The expulsion of the French from Frankfurt by the Hessians on the 2nd halted the negotiations initiated by the Frankfurt deputies in Paris. Sadly, this expulsion led to severe consequences, including the maiming of several French soldiers, allegedly by inhabitants loyal to Custine and the Jacobin clubbists of Mainz. These distressing occurrences amplified the turmoil in Paris. By mid-December, the Frankfurt deputies were in grave danger. They were declared prisoners and confined to their inns, under guard for their protection. The situation turned ominous as an enraged mob gathered outside their inn, threatening their lives. There were ominous whispers that upon reconquest, Frankfurt would be plundered, reduced to ruins, and razed to the ground. One of the deputies of Gunderode then wrote to a friend, "We place our hope in the providence of a better future, where the righteous, unified in their efforts to protect and defend our city, will stand as its guardians. In this belief, I earnestly declare that our collective commitment to truth holds the power to restore sanity and foster a fair, just, and compassionate society. More than any action we, as deputies, can undertake, it is this unwavering dedication to truth and fairness that will pave the way for a more humane and equitable existence." The journey of the Frankfurt deputies took a new turn in mid-December, as they vigorously defended their city against the unjust accusations hurled its way. Their efforts bore fruit when, with the support of Convention member Gorani and Minister Roland, they successfully cleared Frankfurt's name in the eyes of the National Convention. On January 22, 1793, a decree was passed by the Convention, absolving Frankfurt of any breaches of international law, resulting in the deputies' release. They eventually returned to Frankfurt, reaching home between January 29th and 30th. The turbulent public events, notably the tumultuous storming of Frankfurt on December 2nd, the subsequent resistance against the French across the Rhine, and the eventual recapture of the Mainz fortress by the Prussians in 1793, marked the culmination of Frankfurt's ordeal. The city had already paid 1 million guilders, and this chapter of its history came to a close. The French forces had managed to secure minimal gains in their incursion across the Rhine, primarily focused on financial objectives. However, a critical misjudgment had occurred in their assumption that Frankfurt held substantial funds from Austria and Prussia. Novinger, tasked with locating these reserves, swiftly investigated the records of various trading houses, but found no evidence to support this belief. Interestingly, this assumption wasn't entirely baseless. Earlier there had indeed been Prussian funds held in Frankfurt. These deposits had been entrusted to Willemer, a Prussian agent, senator and banker. However, Willemer had prudently moved these funds to a secure location at the start of October, ensuring their safety and eluding the French pursuit. The events surrounding Frankfurt in late October had reverberations into November. The Mainz Jacobin clubbists aimed to discredit the city, spreading claims that Frankfurt conspired against the French Republic by manipulating assignats, the currency of the time. In response, the city's authorities on November 24th offered a substantial reward, ranging from 200 to 1,000 German thaler, to anyone who could substantiate these allegations. However, no one came forward with evidence to support these accusations. Subsequently, when the Hessians ousted the French from Frankfurt on December 2nd, a new wave of rumours emerged. It was asserted that the citizens of Frankfurt had mercilessly attacked and killed numerous defenceless French soldiers. Custine himself forwarded to the convention what he claimed were murder weapons used by the people of Frankfurt, asserting that thousands of these tools were employed in these alleged attacks. Again, on the 12th of December, the magistrate issued a prize of 1,000 louis d'or for the proof, but again, no one reported anything. The Frankfurt Council, at all events, took great prudence in the implications of the French Revolution in Germany, without ceasing to maintain the firmness that must never be given by a competent government and administration, even in the most challenging circumstances. The Frankfurt Council remained resolute and vigilant in navigating the tumultuous implications of the French Revolution in Germany. Despite the chaos and challenges posed by the revolution, the Council upheld an unwavering commitment to effective governance and administration. Throughout this period, they remained steadfast in their primary responsibilities, never allowing themselves to be swayed by immediate threats or temptations. In fact, their prudent and astute handling of city affairs during this time arguably showcased one of the most judicious and cautious periods in Frankfurt's history. While the subsequent events that followed will offer further testament to their prudent governance, it's important to note an intriguing incident from March 1792. At that time, a Frankfurt bookseller named Wilhelm Fleischer planned to publish a book on fine arts, featuring the words Freistaat Frankfurt, 1792, on its title page as the publishing details. However, the council intervened by appointing a censor to oversee the publication and instructed the publisher to amend the expression. They believed that the chosen wording didn't align with the city's image and might have been received unfavorably by higher authorities, demonstrating their attention to diplomatic subtleties, even in seemingly minor matters. The city of Frankfurt found itself at a critical juncture in history, notably during the drafting of a new constitution for the Free State of Frankfurt in 1848. This designation, although seemingly innocuous, posed potential dangers due to its association with a European state of existence and the revolutionary period's ideals. Interestingly, historical documents revealed that back in 1792, the city's magistrate exhibited tact and foresight by opposing the immediate application of such terminology to the constitution of their small state. The citizens of Frankfurt displayed a similar level of discernment and sagacity as their magistrate. They remained impervious to the grandiose phrases of liberty and equality propagated by the French, which were often accompanied by attempts to incite discord between the poor and the rich. The citizens, fully aware of these tactics, refused to be swayed, understanding that such divisive tactics could jeopardize their harmonious coexistence and the city's prosperity. Nonetheless, it's worth noting that the French generals, through their actions such as occupying a neutral city and demanding an exorbitant account of 2 million guilders, also contributed to Frankfurt's unwavering stance and refusal to be misled. In the wake of a fervent speech against Frankfurt at the Mainz Freedom Club, blaming the city for erroneous assignments, a response emerged from an unexpected source. John Philipp Auerbach, a modest master locksmith from Frankfurt, who had been present at the club session on November 23rd, composed a powerful rejoinder. In his address, he acknowledged the principles of the French doctrine advocating equality and liberty for all. However, he staunchly defended Frankfurt against allegations of unjustly reveling in its acquired wealth and prosperity. He argued that Frankfurt, due to its contentment under a free and stable constitution, resisted any alterations that might compromise its happiness. Auerbach vehemently refuted accusations that the citizens favored habitual authority out of mere habit, emphasizing their loyalty and commitment to the existing system. Further bolstering Frankfurt's defense on November 5th, all the city's master artisans, including locksmiths and bookbinders, united in solidarity. They co-signed a letter addressed to Custine, refuting his claims that Frankfurt's citizens were oppressed and subject to coercion. This collective statement aimed to debunk misconceptions about the city's situation and the treatment of its populace. It sounds like the Frankfurt citizens were quite committed to maintaining a balanced and inclusive governance system. 1/3 of the magistrates being artisans suggests a representative mix within the city's leadership, ensuring diverse perspectives were accounted for. The transparency of financial matters to the citizens, alongside the equitable sharing of responsibilities without any preferential treatment, speaks volumes about the city's commitment to fairness. Moreover, the absence of a distinct, impoverished class, supported by both public and private welfare measures and minimal taxation, further underscores the city's unique prosperity. It seems this success owed much to both a well-structured constitution and the contributions of affluent citizens. It's interesting that General Custine, as a proponent of freedom and public welfare, would find it contradictory not to respect Frankfurt's desire to maintain its constitution. It suggests an acknowledgement that the city system had its merits and contributed to the public good, indicating a potential clash between his principles and the imposition of contributions. We would not know, as the conclusion of the treatise is, with which we might be more vividly exposed to the Frankish Republic than by the sincere desire that it may be as happy with its new constitution as we have hitherto shown who was our own. The response from the Frankfurt artisans resonated as a rightful reprimand against the Jacobin double standards wielded by the French proletarians. It revealed the contrast between the proclaimed French ideals of justice, empathy for the working class, and their pressure tactics aimed at the wealthy. Similarly, the Hessians, akin to the citizens of Frankfurt, were swayed by the enticing proclamations of Custine. Back in October, Custine had directed such a declaration to the Hessian soldiers, painting the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel as a monstrous figure, equating him to a tiger. He vividly illustrated the curse borne by the German nation, the anguish of widows and the despair of orphans, consequences of the Landgrave's trade in bloodless soldiers, which loomed like gathering storm clouds. In his proclamation, Custine not only denounced the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, but also dangled promises of a better fate for Hessian soldiers, should they choose to serve the French cause. Offering a daily wage of 15 kreuzers or a substantial pension of 45 florins, along with the allure of citizenship, fraternity, and liberty, he attempted to win over their allegiance. The unfolding events painted a vivid picture of the soldiers' response to Custine's call. Within days of the proclamation's circulation in Frankfurt, leaflets emerged from the Hessian camp near Hanau, voicing dissent against General Custine's tactics. These leaflets painted a stark picture, condemning Custine's actions of leading his underfed French troops towards the peaceful Hessian territory, emphasizing that Hessian values were more accessible in their constitution than the unjust provocations of arson espoused by the French. The French retaliation against the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel was swift. Within a mere 4 days following the occupation of Frankfurt, a contingent of 1,500 to 1,800 French troops, under the command of Hauchard, penetrated Hessian territory. This aggressive maneuver was a direct response to the Landgrave's incursion into French territory, marking the commencement of a swift and retaliatory military action by the French. The events that followed were marked by French military incursions into neighbouring territories. They ransacked the saline works in Nauheim, a mere 6-hour distance from Frankfurt. Led by Captain Mondorf, who was tasked with overseeing the transportation of salt stores to Hanau, these works fell prey to the invading forces' might. Despite lacking artillery or mounted troops, the defenders of the saline works stood their ground in the face of the enemy's overwhelming power. They staunchly refused surrender, retreating to the nearby Johannisberg. There they valiantly repelled 2 assaults, persevering until their ammunition was exhausted. Inevitably surrounded by enemy cavalry, they eventually succumbed and were taken captive to Frankfurt. General Custine, after parading the captured Hessians triumphantly through half the city, established a bold statement of the French Republic's dominance over the conquered territories. This display not only showcased military might, but also highlighted the assertion of power over the defeated forces. In the aftermath, the Frankfurters extended gestures of goodwill, offering the captives money and food supplies. Their attempts to persuade the prisoners to join French service, however, proved futile. Even when the Mainz Jacobin clubbists tried to extend a brotherly embrace to one of the captives, the Hessians staunchly rejected it, declaring, "Stay away from me. We are Hesse, and remain Hesse." Amidst this tension, a Frankfurter boldly addressed the French, warning, "Only when the Hessians are united you will face real opposition. They are not mere pawn soldiers like the Mainzers." This sentiment reflected the steadfast loyalty and unity among the Hessian captives, emphasizing their determination to remain true to their origins and identity. The ordinary soldiers of the prisoners were taken to Mainz, but the officers were dismissed in honor. Custine had the booty, consisting of many wagons of salt brought down to Maine. Houchard's incursions extended further as he targeted the nearby Wetterau monasteries, including Rockenburg, Arnsberg, Ilbenstadt, and Engeltal, proceeding from Nauheim to pillage these religious establishments. Livestock was seized, contributions were forcefully extracted, and as a display of his aggression, he took 2 nuns, 2 monks, and an official as hostages to Frankfurt. His raids then extended towards the Nassau lands. Despite encountering resistance from small Hessian and Prussian contingents, Houchard's forces advanced, forcing the opposition to retreat. On November 10th, they entered Weilburg, followed by Idstein on the 13th. Both towns were subjected to heavy contributions, amounting to several 100,000 florins, and suffered plundering of the princely stables and available provisions. Meanwhile, the returning Prussian and Hessian troops from France had ventured deep into the Rhine region, prompting the French forces to redirect their attention back towards these advancing troops. Custine, bolstered by substantial reinforcements, strategically positioned the majority of his forces in Höchst. His headquarters were established at Bolongaro's house, situated behind the Nidda River. His stronghold extended towards the Taunus range on the left, encompassing the town of Ober-Ursel, nestled at the mountain's base, surrounded by undulating hills. In Frankfurt, Custine retained a mere 1,500 infantry soldiers, 50 cavalrymen, and a minimal artillery complement of 2 3-pounders, all under the command of General Van Helden. By late November, a significant assembly of Prussian and Hessen castle troops converged in the east and north of Frankfurt. They formed a semicircular formation, spanning from Reifenberg through Nieder-Erlenbach to Wilbell, where Hessen-Darmstadt forces had secured their position. On the 28th of November, the Prussians redeployed, withdrawing from Bockenheim, which lay just half an hour's distance from Frankfurt. They resettled on the opposite side of the Friedberger Warte, establishing themselves farther away in the village of Bornheim. The unfolding events at the onset of the night saw a Prussian officer dispatched by General Kalkreuth to Frankfurt, Tasked with conveying an order to General Van Helden to surrender the city, the officer gained admission through the Eschenheimer Gate Tower and was escorted to Van Helden's provisional quarters at the Red House. His arrival sparked a hopeful excitement among the city's inhabitants, fostering an air of imminent liberation. A crowd, buoyed by optimism, trailed the officer with resounding cheers. Yet Van Helden steadfastly declined the surrender request, setting the stage for a tense standoff. The city's atmosphere had been charged the day prior. Young students, exuberant at the prospect of the French departure, had joyously roamed the streets, heralding the anticipated moment. This exuberance prompted the council to swiftly instruct public teachers to rein in such expressions deemed inappropriate and perilous. Concurrently, the magistrate mandated citizen patrols to traverse the city at night, aiming to preserve tranquility and avert potential conflicts. The 29th of November ushered in a tense moment as discord brewed between the inhabitants and the occupying French forces. Word quickly spread that General Van Helden had fruitlessly requested cannons and ammunition from the city's authorities, subsequently ordering his troops to forcibly procure them from the Ramhof arsenal. Fueled by this rumour, a crowd, unarmed but agitated, swiftly gathered at the court, armed only with axes and resolve. Tensions peaked as the people converged at the court gate, met by French soldiers attempting to force their way through with axes. In the heated exchange, one officer was forcefully brought down, while another was seized and carried to the main guard by soldiers of Frankfurt. Sensing the imminent clash, magistrates and esteemed citizens swiftly intervened, earnestly pleading for calm and reason. A hurried adjutant of General Van Helden's arrived, vehemently denying any demand for cannons, clarifying that the soldiers were simply sent to collect provisions for the garrison from the forecourt of the arsenal. This clarification diffused the misunderstanding, soothing the fervent crowd. The citizens were resolute in preventing any renewed attempts by the French to seize the cannons. Aware of the looming threat posed by a stronger opposing army, they realized that weakening the garrison in a dual internal and external struggle would be perilous. On that same eventful day, Custine made an unexpected appearance in Frankfurt, sparking apprehension among the populace due to concerns regarding the municipal cannons. A growing crowd gathered at the Römer, eagerly awaiting his arrival. After a tense half-hour, Custine emerged, accompanied by the mayors, and his reassuring demeanour alleviated the people's anxieties. Custine's visit served a singular purpose: to assure the magistrate that in the event of conflict at Frankfurt, the city would remain unharmed from cannon fire and siege. The magistrate, in turn, urged the inhabitants to maintain composure and cautioned against engaging in harmful curiosity should clashes erupt between the troops. Custine found himself in a precarious situation, acknowledging on November 29th to his Minister of War that he lacked the reinforcements necessary to withstand the mounting threats gathering against Frankfurt. With an insufficient force of merely 1,500 soldiers, some sources state 2,500, and only 2 guns left within the city, it became increasingly evident that Frankfurt couldn't be defended against the looming presence of the enemy forces. What compounded the challenge was the neglect in fortifying the city's somewhat damaged walls and the oversight in maintaining the trenches guarding them, stretching up to 96 feet across the Rhine. These unaddressed vulnerabilities further compounded the already precarious defence situation. In the critical hours leading up to the impending storm, the pedestrian gates of Frankfurt were curiously left open from dawn till dusk. This seemingly inexplicable decision allowed citizens, particularly the vehemently anti-French merchants, ample opportunity to interact with the German troops stationed outside the city. These exchanges included sharing crucial information about the garrison, prevailing sentiments within Frankfurt, and the readiness of the population for a potential insurrection. This exchange of intelligence and coordination between the inhabitants and the German army set the stage for a critical turning point. Plans were laid out for an imminent insurrection to commence upon a specified signal, prompting the gates to be thrown open. Consequently, in the eyes of military strategists, it appeared that Custine was compelled to pull the vulnerable garrison out of the city and regroup his main forces, stationed near the Nidda River and fortified by entrenchments a few hours away from Frankfurt. Criticism was also levelled at the Prussian military leadership for not directly assaulting the city of Frankfurt, despite the substantial losses suffered by the Hessian soldiers. Instead, they chose to engage the French forces at Höchst, capitalizing on their numerical and tactical advantage. Overcoming the perceived incompetence of Custine, who was considered unable to effectively defend the city, was deemed crucial in forcing a voluntary surrender by the garrison in Frankfurt. The German army, estimated to consist of 30,000 to 34,000 men, surpassed Custine's forces, which ranged from a maximum of 18,000 to 29,900 men at Höchst and 4,000 men in Oberursel. Custine faced the possibility of a retreat to the Rhine without engaging in direct combat. On December 2nd, the decision was made at Prussian headquarters to launch a storm attack on Frankfurt. The troops entrenched at Oberursel, commanded by Houchard, along with the main French army led by Custine at Höchst, were arrayed alongside other soldiers extending as far as Wilbel. Simultaneously, the Hesse-Cassel Corps, supported by Prussian cavalry and infantry, was designated to assault Frankfurt under the leadership of Prussian Lieutenant Colonel von Rüschel. Certainly, the plan was designed for simultaneous action across multiple fronts. Part of the strategy involved a covert crossing of the main river during the night, with a hidden fleet moving down the river to land near the main bridge, specifically the Metzgertor area. From there, this group would traverse the city, targeting the two eastern gates, the Friedberger Tor and the Hanauer Tor. These gates were to be assaulted by a joint Hessian and Prussian column, with additional support provided by a Prussian heavy battery. The coordinated attack was set to commence at 7 o'clock in the morning. However, the main thrust of the combat centered around the columns allocated to assault the specified gates. Interestingly, the unit designated to engage Sachsenhausen was initially intended for a feigned attack. Nonetheless, it managed to swiftly capture Sachsenhausen. Additionally, unfavorable weather conditions impeded the column descending the main river, delaying its arrival until after the complete storming of the town had already occurred. Of the columns against the Friedberger Tor and Hanauer Tor, it was to be commanded by Major General von Wurmb. The operation planned for the storming of the Friedberger Tor and Hanauer Tor was under the command of Major General von Wurmb. The 2nd of December, the chosen day for the assault, marked the first Sunday of Advent. The day commenced with a thick fog, which potentially favoured the German forces as it obscured the approach from the enemy, who were unaware of their adversaries' intentions and could be caught off guard. The Hessians were positioned at their designated locations along the Bornheimer Heide and at the Friedberger Warte by 5 o'clock. However, an unexpected impediment delayed the arrival of the Prussians at the Friedberger Warte until after 7 o'clock. It's worth noting that the king himself, accompanied by his retinue, including several distinguished members, arrived after 8 o'clock. By then the foggy atmosphere had dissipated, altering the initial advantage it might have offered. At 8:30, as the bells tolled in Frankfurt to mark the beginning of the service, the Hessian columns, under orders to initiate the storm, began their advance. However, due to the reservations expressed by the Duke of Brunswick regarding the entire undertaking, the advance was abruptly halted. It was only upon the insistence of Lieutenant Colonel von Rüschel, who had been tasked with leading the storming, and after much urging from him to the king, that the Duke ultimately issued the order to resume the advance. Consequently, it was 9 o'clock by the time the Hessians reached Frankfurt and commenced their efforts. The scene at the Friedberger Tor was chaotic as the Hessians approached. Unexpectedly, a carriage emerged from the open gates, a sign of the French's careless and disorganized demeanor. 25 guardsmen swiftly reacted, advancing towards the drawbridge which the French had hastily closed after the carriage had exited. Upon reaching the bridge, they encountered French fire, the echoing shots causing their horses to panic and retreat. Seizing the opportunity, the French raised the drawbridge before the advancing Hessian Jaegers could reach it. The Jaegers sought cover in the gardens flanking the road, engaging in a rapid exchange of gunfire, utilizing walls, hedges, and nearby structures for cover. Meanwhile, the Grenadier Battalion led by Prince Charles von Hesse-Philippsthal, responding to the call that the gate was open, moved swiftly toward the edge of the moat. Their advance caused a bottleneck effect, hindering the progress of the central column behind them, which was also halted by Prince Charles's battalion due to the congestion at the narrow gateway. The situation turned dire as over 2,000 men found themselves tightly packed between the towering guard walls. They were vulnerable to the relentless enemy fire, with the French positioned behind the protective parapets of the wall and the small openings in the gate towers. The French fired blindly into the mass of their opponents, relying on the confines of the gate structure to ensure the effectiveness of their shots. In the face of the relentless French fire, the Hessian Jaegers, along with the Prince's battalion and the storming column, valiantly endured, returning fire from their covered positions. However, their efforts yielded only minimal impact against the fortified French defenders. After approximately 30 minutes of intense fighting and the depletion of most of their ammunition, the situation had turned grim. Nearly 1/6 of the Prince's battalion, positioned at the most vulnerable spot, lay dead or wounded. Among the casualties were notable figures like Captains von Wolf and von Munchhausen, and the injuries included the Prince himself, Major von Donop, Captain de Clares, and Lieutenant von Rademacher. Eventually the order came to retreat, prompting the battalion, similar to the Jaegers, to seek cover behind the hedges and walls of the adjacent gardens. Meanwhile, the remaining troops regrouped to create space for setting up cannons with the intent of demolishing the drawbridge and the gate. However, this withdrawal led to some confusion among the troops, especially those under Colonel von Benning, which occupied most of the road behind the causeway. The colonel's command resounded among his troops, demanding absolute stillness and steadfastness despite the relentless hail of bullets. Every soldier adhered to the directive, showing unwavering resolve amidst the chaotic storm of gunfire. As casualties occurred, soldiers swiftly moved to fill the gaps, maintaining a seamless and unbroken formation akin to a white flag of determination. Amidst this harrowing scene, the only audible sounds were the continuous impact of enemy bullets and the muted sighs of the fallen. The artisans of Frankfurt, numbering in the thousands, harboured a fervent hatred towards the French occupiers, yearning for liberation from their grasp. This sentiment resonated strongly within the city's population, especially among the skilled craftsmen, Prussians, Hessians, and various other North German labourers. From carpenters and locksmiths to bakers, tailors, and wig-makers, these artisans united in their shared desire to rid the city of the French presence. As the storming efforts unfolded at the gates, the artillery positioned by the Prussians struggled to make a significant impact on the town's defences. Their gunfire was more an appeal for active assistance from the inhabitants than a decisive blow against the gates. Colonel von Benning's battalion, tasked with the assault on the Hanauer Tor, faced stern resistance from the French defenders, failing to breach the gate despite their efforts. The German troops were resolute in supporting the Hessians during this critical period. Plans were made to assist in seizing the French garrison during the attack, aiming to forcefully open the doors. In the lead-up to the event, every opportunity was taken to engage with Frankfurt's German troops, particularly on the Friday preceding the attack. They had pledged this support and remained true to their word on the 2nd of December. When the initial shots were fired, the citizens who had gathered in the churches returned home, while artisans armed themselves with sticks and axes, converging along the line. Despite the authorities urging for them to disperse, these individuals remained steadfast, their frustration against the French escalating. Among themselves they vocalized their grievances, labeling Custine a traitor for his broken promises, alleging that he had assured the city wouldn't face bombardment, and had pledged to withdraw his troops in the presence of the Germans without resistance. The Zeil bustled with crowds of journeymen, their presence unnerving the French reserve stationed there. Amidst the chaos, grenades fell, prompting a frantic retreat of most of the French reserve towards the Bockenheimer Gate in the west. Simultaneously, the artisans hurried, some towards Friedberger Tor, and others to Hanauer Tor. The boldest among them reached both gates around 15 minutes before 10 o'clock, determined to overpower the guards. General Van Helden, commanding the city, had garnered more respect from the citizens compared to Custine. Sensing the imminent arrival of the Hessians, Van Helden was resolute in honouring the promise made by Custine. Initially, he dispatched a trumpeter to Friedberger Tor to propose the surrender of the town. When the trumpeter failed to return, potentially hindered by the gate's officers, Van Helden urged the senior mayor to send another municipal trumpeter in an attempt to communicate. The city trumpeter, Rauch, was dispatched on horseback to deliver Van Helden's message. Simultaneously, Van Helden himself, accompanied by an officer, headed towards the Friedberger Tor. However, they were forced to retreat as their trumpeter, blowing the signal twice on the drawbridge, went unheard amidst the intense gunfire. Meanwhile, at the Allerheiligentor, the watch officer prevented the city trumpeter from leaving. When the trumpeter attempted to signal from within the gate, the officer aimed his pistol at him. In that critical moment, the artisans arrived at the gate, disarmed the officer, overwhelmed the guard, breached the gate, severed the drawbridge, and thus secured entry for the approaching Hessian column. The scene unfolded almost simultaneously at 10 o'clock, at both the Allerheiligentor and the Friedberger Tor. As the Hessian forces surged in, the French garrison swiftly fled. The journeymen, filled with fervour and determination, welcomed their fellow German compatriots with shouts, swinging hats, and uproarious drumming. They stormed into the city amid fervent cries, "Death to Custinus! Custinus must die!" and the traditional soldiers' rallying call, "Schuri drauf!" The initial arrivals at the Friedberger Tor included Major von Offenbach, Lieutenants von Kochhausen and von Dornberg, and Fähnrich von Dittfurth. Leading the way, Lieutenant von Selchow and Fahrenjunker Appelius swiftly unfurled the flag, signalling the waiting battalions outside the gates. As the gates were stormed, the victorious Germans pursued the fleeing French toward the Bockenheimer Tor, scaling the walls on either side to clear them of the retreating enemy. Before the Hessians' attack, General Van Helden, withdrawing from the Friedberger Tor to the Zeil, had dispatched his only 2 guns and about 100 men toward that gate. However, the journeyman artisans managed to impede this reinforcement. When both units reached Wilbella Street, they encountered a sizable gathering of craftsmen. Despite the officers' reluctance to confront the gathered crowd, the soldiers were ordered to halt. They remained inactive until the Hessians' arrival forced them into retreat. At the 2 cannons, the artisans disabled the wheels, turned them around, and pushed them to Schaefer Alley, where the wheels detached, causing the cannons to come to a halt. The scene during the Hessians' entry into the city was chaotic, with some fleeing French soldiers discarding their gear in a bid to escape. While a few soldiers resigned themselves to their perceived loss and offered no resistance, others showed stubbornness and fought back. Instances of French soldiers pleading for mercy during the chaos were met with mixed responses from the Hessian forces. Although some showed no mercy, these cases were isolated. Generally, the Hessians demonstrated relatively mild behavior. The aftermath revealed that only a small number of French soldiers were found injured or killed in the streets. 7 were found dead, and 10 were wounded. On the ramparts, where the French resistance was stronger, the toll was heavier, with 34 soldiers killed and 129 wounded. Despite this, a handful of citizens chose to shelter fleeing French soldiers, harboring them in their homes until they were later turned over to the Hessians as prisoners. Additionally, many French soldiers managed to escape the city altogether. Amidst the turmoil, instances of compassion and unexpected kindness emerged. There was a wounded officer who, pleading for mercy, found refuge with the master baker Ranftat. 2 French soldiers, who had been staying with Gardener Becker, were discreetly led out of the city in civilian attire. Surprisingly, even among those deeply aggrieved by the events, there were acts of compassion. A carpenter from Mecklenburg harboured a French soldier in his room for 2 days and then helped him safely leave the city using a pass. Additionally, several artisans were wounded while navigating the chaotic streets. The injured French soldiers were swiftly transported to the hospital for medical care. The chaos of the aftermath primarily centred around Bockenheimer Tor and Mainzer Tor, where many of the fleeing French soldiers congregated. Others were discovered near the stormed city gates, the Headguard area, Theatre Square, and even on the main bridge. The aftermath revealed additional French soldiers near the Affentor and Schaumain Tor at Sachsenhausen, where a considerable contingent had been stationed. The firing of cannonballs caused damage to several houses in the city, amounting to an estimated 5,000 guilders. The toll on the Hessian side was severe, with the loss of 7 officers and 75 civilians, while 11 officers and 93 civilians sustained injuries, many of which were serious. The total count of casualties for the Hessians reached 18 officers and 168 civilians. Additionally, some of the wounded Hessian individuals, unable to resist any longer, pushed on until they succumbed, collapsing on their way and eventually passing away. Major von Donop, despite sustaining severe wounds at the start of the storm, continued to lead his battalion until he received a 3rd fatal wound, forcing him to relinquish command. Lieutenant Colonel Ruschel, the leader of the attack, was also greatly fatigued when he arrived with the troops on the Saale. The citizens of Frankfurt welcomed the invading Hessians from the windows of their homes with resounding cheers and waving of white shawls. Some women from the higher echelons of society, unable to contain their joy, embraced the first arriving officers and soldiers. Subsequently, an abundance of food and drinks were provided to refresh the weary warriors. As recounted by one soldier 3 decades later, the expressions of goodwill were boundless. Heartfelt embraces, kisses, and handshakes were exchanged profusely. Simultaneously, compassionate individuals tended to the needs of the wounded enemies, displaying a sense of humanity amidst the chaos of conflict. It appears that apart from the journeymen, the general population didn't actively engage in the conflict. An interrogation conducted by the magistracy on the 21st compiled the statements of wounded French soldiers in hospitals. Only 3 of them hadn't been injured by Hessian soldiers. However, one of these 3 noted that while attempting to escape with around 50 comrades towards the main, journeymen had pelted them with stones and fired shots, resulting in approximately 7 additional injuries. Contrary to the actual events, Custine reported to the convention in Paris that on December 2nd, the Frankfurters had massacred no fewer than 300 Frenchmen. He even presented one of the alleged murder weapons and claimed that nearly 10,000 individuals in the city were armed with such knives. This information starkly contradicts the testimonies collected and doesn't align with the true nature of the events. It seems that after the initial capture, the King of Prussia arrived on the scene, but swiftly returned to oversee the pursuit of the retreating French forces. At key locations like the Bockenheimer Tor and the Allerheiligen Tor, where General Custine had amassed 8,000 troops under Neuwinger from Höchst, the fleeing French encountered opposition. Some even re-entered the city, coming close to the Bockenheimer Tor. However, part of the fleeing French soldiers faced confrontations and captures by the Hessian cavalry. As troops and artillery from the German army arrived, the French were compelled to retreat toward Höchst, moving through Bockenheim and Rödelheim. Concurrently, the French forces were expelled from Oberursel. Following these events, Custine abandoned his position at Höchst the following day and withdrew to Hochheim. Eventually, the French were driven across the Rhine, with only their contingent stationed in the Königstein fortress remaining until March 1793. The events of December 2nd resulted in significant losses for the French forces in the city. They suffered 41 fatalities within the city, along with 139 severe injuries and 58 individuals taken as prisoners. The fallen were buried on Bornheimer Heide, joined by 19 others who had died in the hospitals. This fact is documented by an official certificate from the mayor of Bornheim kept in the archives. Among the captured were 44 officers, including the commanding general, Van Helden. His safety was at risk due to the anger that the Hessians harbored toward his superior, General Custine. The animosity toward General Custine was intense among some of the soldiers. False rumors, like the belief that Custine was present at General Van Helden's residence in Frankfurt, led to dramatic incidents. One Hessian soldier mistook someone at the window for Custine and aimed a rifle, but a resident intervened and prevented the shot. Others also attempted to enter the apartment, believing Custine was inside with intentions to harm him, but officers intervened and stopped them. The King of Prussia acknowledged the bravery of the Hessian soldiers and the courageous artisans who contributed to the city's defense. He rewarded the standout artisans with monetary gifts, with around 20 of them receiving 12 to 16 louis d'or for their exceptional efforts. Additionally, 3 skilled craftsmen from Bremen, Mecklenburg, and Heilbronn were honored with a letter of recommendation bearing the names of the King of Prussia and the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel. This letter urged everyone to welcome and support these individuals, granting them permission to reside and establish themselves in any Prussian or Hessian location. The king showed profound appreciation for the Hessian troops. On December 2nd, he personally inspected the 4 storm columns, conveying his gratitude and admiration. In his address to them, he expressed his disbelief, likening the intense battle to a mere training exercise in Potsdam. To solidify his appreciation, he granted each man from the Guard regiments and Hesse-Philippsthal's battalion half a gulden, and exempted the Hessians from any service for a full 24 hours. In lieu of their duties, 3 Prussian battalions were reassigned to take their place. The Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel also honoured the entire corps by gifting 1 florin to each sub-officer and half a gulden to every common soldier as a token of gratitude. The king's gratitude extended further with promises of doubled pensions for the invalids, widows, and orphans of the fallen soldiers. Additionally, substantial donations were made to support these groups. Recognizing their valor, there were numerous promotions and the awarding of medals for their bravery. In 1793, the king honored the fallen Hessian soldiers by commissioning a memorial. Designed by the court architect Langhans in Berlin and envisioned by the brother of the renowned minister von Stein, this monument stands as one of the most exquisite creations of that era, a testament to the sacrifice and bravery of those who lost their lives in battle. It's remarkable how the monument was placed precisely at the site of the major battle, right in front of the Friedberger Thor, where many Hessian soldiers fought bravely and lost their lives. Its foundation comprises Hessian basalt pieces, forming a rock group supporting a 10-foot-high cube made of German marble. Atop this cube, there's a sculpture depicting a dynamic head, wrapped in a lion's skin, a colossal helmet, a shield, and a robust club forged from the captured weapons. Embedded within the sides of the marble cube are 4 bronze tablets. One of these tablets records the exact year and day of the storm. Another bears an inscription: Frederick William II, King of Prussia, the noble Hessians, who fell victoriously in the struggle for the fatherland. On the third are the words, the companion of laborious enterprises of the Hessian war spirits, who, during the conquest of Frankfurt, died on December 2nd, 1792, of a glorious death, ordered this monument to be erected a witness of their courage, an admirer of her fortitude. Frederick William II, King of Prussia, 1793. In the fourth table, under the heading, "Here the deaths of the heroes died," the names of the 55 fallen at this place, namely, Prince Charles of Hesse-Philippsthal, Major C.D. von Donop, Captain C. von Wolf, D. von de Cleers, C.W. Munchausen, Lieutenants F.C.G. von Rademacher, von Radehausen, Fähnrich G. Hundeschagen, N.C.O.S. Großkurt, Wissner, Ort, Wachs, Vaupel, Freund, Kersting, Soldiers Franke, Nennstiel, Döllet, Müller, Lapp, Hölter, Horn, Karges, Steißel, Vogt, Hecht, Knotte, Köhler, Wagner, Knipp, Giebert, Meil, Herzog, Töne, Wunsch, Zwick, Werbe, Hildebrand, Schill, Bürger, Kolmar, Gerlach, Traube, Priester, Osterheld, Hassenflug, Franke, Jitter, Gerst, Ill, Benderoth, Nöll, Deichmüller, Schlingenstein, Aßmann, Göricke. The construction of the monument is said to have cost 22,000 guilders. In 1844, King Frederick William IV had this monument restored. The death of Prince Charles von Hesse-Philippsthal, a month after his severe injury on December 2, 1792, in Frankfurt, likely drew the attention and concern of his family and relatives. Given the importance of his position and status, it's reasonable to assume that family members or representatives would have been present or quickly travelled to Frankfurt to attend to the prince, considering the communications and transportation available between Frankfurt, Philippsthal Castle, and the Hessian capital, Kassel. The notion that Prince Charles von Hesse-Philippsthal might have been buried in a Frankfurt cemetery instead of being interred in the princely family crypt seems perplexing, especially if it deviates from customary burial practices for royalty. The legend surrounding this possibility is intriguing, especially if there exists an exquisite grave in the Frankfurt cemetery, believed to be that of the prince. The details of the tomb's structure, with an obelisk in relief and military emblems carved underneath, evoke a profound tribute, possibly commemorating the military service and valor of the deceased. The inclusion of symbols like a helmet with a laurel wreath, a sword and a shield often represents courage, victory, and the legacy of a warrior. The presence of a Prussian eagle escutcheon might suggest a connection to Prussian royalty or military affiliations, adding a layer of significance to the tomb's design. The absence of the metal letter inscriptions might add to the mystery surrounding the grave and its occupant. Such intricate memorials often reflect deep reverence and honor for the deceased individual. The presence of the last emblem strongly suggests that the tombstone was meant to commemorate the retirement of a Prussian officer rather than a Hessian one. Despite Prince Charles of Hesse-Philippsthal being awarded the Prussian Large Red Eagle Order before his passing, the coat of arms depicted doesn't match his. However, a cross and ribbon indicative of the order are absent. Evidence indicates the grave holds the remains of a Prussian military figure. Accounts from individuals who once read the metal inscription affirm that it was the resting place of a Prussian colonel severely wounded across the Rhine in a battle with the French. These witnesses, known for their reliability, even claim to recall the wording of the inscription supporting this assertion. The condemnation is consequently nothing but a saga. However, it was immortalized 3 years ago. In 1870, 2 Hessian princes restored the supposed tomb of their heroic relatives. They were given a new inscription that states that this was the grave of Prince Charles, who died on the 2nd of January 1793, seriously wounded Hesse-Philippsthal. So we have a new example of how legends form and become history. A lesser-known but intriguing aspect of the December 2nd events involves a trial conducted between the Prussian king's cabinet and the Frankfurt magistrate at a location known as Fischerfelde. This area, sparsely populated with a handful of houses, housed a French magazine, guarded by about 40 soldiers with an officer in charge. When the storming commenced, a civil defense team was dispatched to Loen to secure the magazine and prevent its destruction. However, their efforts were thwarted as the French guards denied them entry and even threatened to use force against them. At the same time, many inhabitants had gathered on the nearby Wohlgraben. Among them was Reuss, a 25-year-old grinder who had armed himself with his rifle and a sabre and cartridge. He urged his fellow citizens also to take the rifles to fight against the French. No one followed him, but all exhorted him not to participate in the struggle, which the magistrate had forbidden all the citizens a few days before. Undeterred by the reluctance of others, Reuss remained unwavering in his patriotic fervour. It wasn't long before news reached the 40 Frenchmen that the Hessians had entered the city. To avoid being trapped, they hastily devised a plan to escape across the main bridge in 3 separate groups. Their route led them toward the Wohlgraben, where they encountered the assembled citizens who staunchly opposed their passage. Despite the officers' pleas for them to move aside, the citizens stood resolute, adamantly denying the French access to their intended path. Despite the officers' earnest plea, the crowd remained unmoved, pelting the French with stones. Even the officer, hat in hand, beseeched them to allow passage, simultaneously commanding his soldiers to disarm in a bid to appease the situation. However, these efforts proved futile as the crowd persisted, hurling stones and even firing shots at the soldiers. The chaos resulted in 3 Frenchmen sustaining injuries, one struck by a bullet that pierced both his knees, necessitating immediate hospitalization. Witnesses later testified that it was Reuss who had fired the shot. Following the events of December 2nd, when the magistrate commenced an inquiry into the happenings within the city, Reuss found himself imprisoned in January 1793. The investigation faced obstacles as the wounded Frenchman, a critical witness, could not be located. It was presumed he had succumbed to his injuries shortly after being hospitalized, his identity lost among the other anonymous deceased. Contradictory testimonies complicated matters further. While several citizens attested that Reuss had fired the shot causing the Frenchman's injury, they were willing to formalize their statements. Reuss vehemently denied these accusations, adamantly asserting that his shot was directed into the air. However, his own statements contained inconsistencies, casting doubt on his claims. By February 28th, the investigation drew to a close, and Reuss was prompted to designate a legal representative. The severity of the suspicion against him was evident. He was accused of defying the prohibitive order against active participation in the conflict and, purportedly, targeting defenseless soldiers. Consequently, his case transitioned into a criminal matter. The significance of this incident sparked diplomatic negotiations as early as February 1793, and the correspondence surrounding it bears intriguing details worth noting. On February 12th, Prussian Colonel von Manstein penned a letter addressed to the esteemed elderly mayor, Johann Christoph von Lauterbach, containing the following contents. Esteemed Mayor, His Majesty the King of Prussia has been apprised of the detention of a Frankfurt citizen named Reuss, held in prison for allegedly causing injury to a Frenchman during the city's reoccupation. Should we consider the perspective that this citizen acted upon his perceived duty and patriotic fervour, it becomes imperative to scrutinize his true intent. Whether he acted in excessive zeal or overstepped his bounds requires careful examination before contemplating his release. It is undeniable that while acknowledging the enemy status of the Frenchman, the repercussions of the citizen's potential ruin far outweigh the destruction of an adversary of the Empire. In accordance with His Majesty's sentiments, I respectfully inquire about the possibility of Reuss's release. However, I do so with the expectation of a judicious investigation that the esteemed Interrogation Office should conduct. I shall await news on this matter with hopeful anticipation. With utmost respect and steadfast loyalty, Manstein. The mayor presented this intercession to the magistrate, who, on the 16th of February, sent to General Manstein the following. An expeditious council's urgent attention is earnestly sought, with the highest priority accorded to this matter. His Prussian Majesty is steadfastly committed to upholding principles, albeit within the scope of what is permissible in the present circumstances. Considering Reuss's occupation, it becomes evident that his actions, attacking the present French contingent, transgressed the strict prohibition imposed upon all local citizens. The investigation has unearthed the community's explicit warnings against such actions, highlighting the gravity of their intentions. It is clear that the accused undertaking cannot be classified as patriotic, but rather falls within the category of transgressions for which the enforcement of laws, upon thorough examination, must decisively pronounce judgment. The potential release could jeopardize the efficacy of the law. This statement underscores the breach of prohibition and emphasizes the necessity for legal judgment in this case, indicating that the release might undermine the authority of the law. 3 days later, the council decided to accelerate the investigation as far as possible and not to do the verdict itself after its termination, but to have it precipitated by a German law faculty, that is, by impartiality, but now to give the reasons to the Prussian Major von Zastrow why Reuss could not get rid of his arrest yet. The latter happened immediately through the following written argument. 1. It is paramount for a prestigious council of the imperial city of Frankfurt, especially during the occupation by French troops, to actively dissuade its citizens and jurisdictions from any actions against the occupying forces. Any actions displaying animosity or allegiance towards the French nation would serve little purpose. Compliance with the directives essential to the greater belligerent powers is crucial for the well-being of the local imperial city. However, these intentions conflict with the substantial financial contributions previously made and the subsequent mandates imposed by the National Convention. 2. Despite these advisories, the local citizens and inhabitants during the entirety of the French troops' presence, notably on the 2nd of December last year, the day of the city's reoccupation by the combined Prussian and Hessian troops, were significantly agitated. The citizens' behavior towards the French on that date was notably contentious, prompting concerns about the severity of their actions. 3. Subsequently, when reports from not only the Mainz Gazette, but also General Custine's report to the National Convention alleged conspiracy, treason, and potentially premeditated acts of violence against the Frankfurters, the magistrate had no recourse but to conduct a comprehensive official inquiry into those who acted against the Emperor on that day. Contrary to all suppositions, the French had departed to take the necessary punishment and responsibility, and assure both General Custine and the National Convention of the respected writings and memoirs in public printing. 4. During these investigations, the unbecoming of those afflictions has been satisfactorily fulfilled to the most excellent satisfaction of a noble counsellor. However, an exception arose in the case of the scissors grinder Ludwig Karl Reuss. Despite residing here for a year and a half and being generally unremarkable, several witnesses came forth, accusing him of an incident on the 2nd of December last year. Against the advice of fellow citizens and the French commander stationed near the Fischerfelder, close to the French magazine Reuss, entrusted with a rifle intended for a vastly different purpose as a citizen, intercepted the fleeing Frenchman at the Wohlgraben. His actions deviated from the warnings issued, and in the midst of this confrontation he discharged his firearm, injuring a Frenchman in the legs severely enough to cause immediate collapse, necessitating urgent hospitalization. 5. The alignment of witness accounts, the stark nature of the incident itself, and the accused's inability to provide a coherent defense compelled the magistrate's intervention. This decision, guided by the diverse and vigorous exhortations previously directed at all citizens and locals to prevent any untimely and misguided expressions of patriotism, led to Reuss's arrest in early January of the current year. This action occurred while there was still a glimmer of hope, awaiting the resolution of the corpus delicti through the wounded French soldier's recovery or demise. This imperative was underscored by the necessity for interrogation and thorough legal examination regarding the severity and potential fatality of the soldier's injury. Furthermore, this course of action aimed not only to confirm the facts, but also to exercise caution, apprehending individuals, potentially of lower social standing, suspected of attempting to evade legal proceedings. 6. It seems that despite exhaustive efforts, there has been no success in identifying the injured man. Consequently, with no further leads forthcoming, the pinnacle of conscientious action demands a particular judgment. As far as current knowledge extends, the individual under arrest appears unrelated to the inflicted injury and thus doesn't deserve punishment. Yet the absence of substantial evidence precludes complete exoneration. Therefore, the situation necessitates an acquittal due to a lack of evidence linking the accused to the injury. However, this outcome should not preclude preparation for reparation or compensation to the affected party, albeit without a full exoneration. Upholding justice demands this measured approach, acknowledging the absence of culpability, while considering the moral obligation to address any resulting harm. 7. Since the tumultuous events of December 2nd, the local populace has endured unjust defamation. However, thorough investigations have consistently evidenced their rational and non-hostile conduct during the French occupation. This behavior not only attests to the innocence of the local population, but also serves to repudiate any alignment solely with the entire French nation. Given the intricate and multifaceted relations between the people of this city and the French nation, there exists a greater inclination towards cooperation and understanding. Thus, the magistrate's office, amidst ongoing investigations, should be vigilant to neither neglect nor show undue leniency towards those who are under suspicion or found guilty. This balanced approach is essential to uphold fairness and discern the truth in this complex and sensitive situation. 8. It's evident that a noble council, naturally desiring to hold accountable any citizens engaged in criminal behavior, issued urgent warnings to prevent misconduct. However, if, in the course of investigations intended to prosecute a local citizen, even of the lowest class, for actions on that singular day, there's a departure from legal provisions, doubts could easily arise. This deviation could cast doubt on the Council's intentions and efforts to identify and punish the guilty as warranted. Such deviations might undermine their authority and effectiveness in countering the unfounded accusations that have circulated thus far. Maintaining adherence to legal procedures is crucial to preserve the Council's credibility in seeking justice and dispelling the tarnishing allegations. 9. In this particular case, a higher council of nobles not only faces the duty of lawfully investigating and enforcing legal consequences, but also confronts the challenge of balancing justice with broader considerations. Dismissing the detainee without a legal sentence of arrest could not only offend legal protocols but also jeopardize the welfare of the entire community, potentially exacerbating tensions with a nation as a whole. The absolution of this offense, therefore, conflicts with a more significant objective. In such a delicate situation, the Noble Council recognizes that expediting the investigation isn't solely about defending the detainee at the city's expense. Rather, it's about ensuring swift justice while considering the city's resources. Therefore, the Council intends to swiftly forward the files for the verdict to an external faculty, prioritizing a speedy resolution without compromising the detainee's rights or neglecting broader civic duties. The Council aims to exhaust all avenues to ensure fairness for the prisoner, while simultaneously fulfilling higher civic responsibilities for the well-being and harmony of the local town and its citizenry. The following letter from the Prussian Minister of State, Marquis de Lucchesini, to the senior mayor followed this detailed discussion. I trust this letter finds you well. I am compelled to address a matter of significance regarding your eldest son, Ludwig Karl Reuss, who remains incarcerated for the alleged offence of injuring a French soldier during the occupation of Frankfurt by our Hessian troops. His prolonged detention is a matter of concern that I cannot overlook. The stringent measures taken in this regard warrant scrutiny, especially considering the unjust and harsh actions of the French in the occupied German states, actions that invoke discontent among members of the Empire rather than fostering timely resolution. The continued confinement of your son is a pressing concern, and I implore your attention and intervention in this matter. Your prompt and judicious actions will undoubtedly contribute to rectifying this situation and ensuring a fair and just resolution. Furthermore, considering the profound sentiments residing in the hearts of German citizens, a fervent love for their homeland, and a righteous abhorrence toward the vanquished enemy, these emotions should be nurtured rather than suppressed. Moreover, I remain unconvinced of the veracity of the offence attributed to Reuss. His 8-week imprisonment, during which his robust health and financial stability deteriorated, enduring dire circumstances resulting in a weekly loss of 10 thalers, raises questions. It leads one to ponder whether his swift action, which might be excusable given his circumstances, could be perceived not as recklessness, but as commendable patriotism, albeit unjustly penalized in this instance. If this severity persists, it could misconstrue an act born out of patriotic intent as deserving of punishment. Therefore, it's inconceivable for His Majesty, your King, to disregard a rightful citizen, particularly one who is the brother of a grenadier in the esteemed battalion. This citizen deserves your gracious consideration, an act that should not be swayed by emotions, but guided by impartial judgment, aiming to avoid untimely actions that might suppress justified circumstances. Though I refrain from directly corresponding with the Supreme High Command, I comprehend that such a decision aligns with His Majesty's natural inclinations. Furthermore, I harbour no doubt that the esteemed magistrate of this city, having carefully considered all evidence presented to His Majesty, will be hesitant to prolong Reuss's imprisonment, especially considering that he has already suffered tenfold, even as the wounded Frenchman has now fully recovered. Therefore, I won't elaborate on the potential repercussions of prolonged severity or the unpleasant implications that may ensue, but I wish to reiterate my utmost respect and assurance of goodwill. With esteemed regards, Custine. Frankfurt am Main, February 28, 1793. The response provided on the 2nd of March delved into a comprehensive discussion, acknowledging the profound concern this matter has evoked within the Council. The explanation was carefully articulated, emphasizing the repetitive and meticulous consideration that this issue has undergone. It commenced with the following. The noble Council holds no greater concern than for the esteemed von Huld and His Majesty, the King of Prussia. However, while there is a desire to show utmost respect for His Majesty in every conceivable manner, there is an equally pressing wish to emphasize the profound significance attached to the unconditional release of Reuss. Nevertheless, a distinct contrast emerged in Reuss's conduct, notably after the pivotal point when it was ascertained that the wounded Frenchman had fully recovered. Despite exhaustive investigations, there was an inability to access crucial information from local hospitals. From the available testimonies detailing the nature of the wound, it seems apparent that the Frenchman likely succumbed to the repercussions of that injury within a few days of being transported to the hospital. This much seems certain. Hence, even those most assured are compelled to acknowledge that the Council of Elders couldn't release Reuss without the legal substantiation necessary. It's imperative to note that such a decision shouldn't condone the excessively harsh and malicious accusations, particularly the prevalent animosity and unfounded condemnation directed towards those diligently present, expressing dissent against the presence of the occupying French troops. The extension of Reuss's arrest, to his understanding, might not seem excessive. He discharged his weapon despite explicit and verbal prohibitions, disregarding urgent warnings from fellow citizens. His action occurred after the city had been captured, with no imminent threat from the fleeing French troops at that moment. This particular act, wherein the perpetrator endangered not only himself but also jeopardized the entire city, was regarded as deeply concerning. It was reminiscent of a provocative manifesto sent out last year towards the conclusion of the invasion by the combined armies into France, an action deemed highly punishable. On the 2nd of December, the subsequent directives or conclusions from the French National Convention that later defined the unequivocal manner of proceedings in the German territories occupied by them had not yet been issued. During the period when they occupied the imperial city, the French behaved significantly differently towards the local citizens than the later directives would suggest. Reus, in essence, cannot claim even a remote association with the notion of a patriotic deed. There is even less suspicion towards the Senate's patriotism, especially when Reus, through exhortations and his actions, inadvertently encouraged his entire community towards a course that sought punishment. The deputies from this town were integral to a shared cause. In Paris, baseless and exaggerated accusations of malicious behavior on the day of the city's reoccupation led to their several weeks of perilous arrest. Considering this, one can only imagine the dire consequences if these deputies had behaved as recklessly as the prisoner. Such careless behavior from multiple local citizens could have had catastrophic implications for the city as a whole. The Council's multiple and public assertions emphasized their comprehensive investigations, affirming that only those found guilty through rigorous inquiry should be subject to punishment according to the laws, as stated by the deputies. Now consider that by advocating for Reus's exoneration, not only do they dismiss all protocols of inquiry previously used by the local citizens to defend themselves against slanderous accusations, but the Council also fears that a failure to earnestly uncover and penalize the actual perpetrators of the crime would cast doubt on the Senate's ability to fulfill its weighty responsibilities to the city and its citizenry. In the interim, the case files have been officially closed, and Reus has been released, with the city's funds covering the defensive rebuttal. This action aims to entirely disprove the baseless claim that Reus should receive a weekly income of 10 thalers. Additionally, due to her challenging domestic situation, Reus's wife sought support for her husband through local charitable foundations. Particularly crucial now is expediting the outcomes following the defense presented to the Foreign Law Faculty. The Senate earnestly endeavors to fulfill all responsibilities, not neglecting any higher duties for the sake of Reus's benefit. Hence, I humbly request your acceptance of unwavering admiration and esteem, sentiments I hold with utmost honor. Custine gave the following remarks to this letter. Highly benevolent gentlemen, exceedingly honorable Mr. Mayor, as I previously corresponded with Hochwohlgeboren, with the prior knowledge and approval of His Majesty the King of Prussia, I found it necessary to relay the response that ensued. This reply has garnered considerable attention from the King, myself, and those familiar with the circumstances. It highlighted a fair trial for a free citizen, seemingly suggesting a preordained judgment upon him. The esteemed letter sheds light on the scant knowledge and disregard for the primary circumstance, the aftermath of the injury inflicted upon the French soldier by Reus. This crucial information must be unveiled in every legal proceeding, taking precedence above all else. Additionally, in the subsequent correspondence, Hochwohlgeboren refers to a period when the city of Frankfurt was not in conflict with France, noting the dispatch of deputies to the National Convention at that time. Without delving into that historical context, no German citizen truly devoted to the dignity of the German fatherland would affirm such affirmations. Therefore, I must remind Hochwohlgeboren that the discussion pertains to the present circumstances rather than those of a bygone era. Presently, the city of Frankfurt faces unjust aggression from the French, entangling each of its members in a conflict they cannot evade. Under these circumstances, seeking protection without fulfilling their responsibilities, as was deemed permissible before, is no longer feasible. Consequently, Your Majesty cannot find satisfaction solely in the reasoning presented in Hochwohlgeboren's letter insisting on an immediate release of the accused. With this explanation, I don't doubt that Hochwedel-Rath will find less satisfaction in complying, a fact I mustn't conceal from Hochwohlgeboren, if this secondary attempt at mediation fails to yield results, and Reuss remains in a situation you're determined to avert through your royal protection, I have deemed it my duty out of friendship and deep regard to intervene, aiming to prevent this outcome if at all possible. With sincere respect and goodwill, I remain, highly devoted, Custine, Frankfurt, and Main March 4th, 1793. At this letter, the council decided immediately to reject the request opt for the release of Reuss, albeit purely out of legal caution regarding the arrest. The mayor indicated this to the royal minister in the following words: "Regrettably, despite our best efforts, the fundamental principles tied to his arrest, which we cannot circumvent, have not secured Hochwohlgeboren's endorsement. The council, in response to these considerations, has heightened its vigilance, particularly in alignment with their king's wishes and inclinations. The council is eager to demonstrate its utmost commitment on every possible occasion. However, when grand strategic plans and overarching considerations for the cabinets of eminent monarchs necessitate a departure from legal protocols, the council holds that, for a minor entity within the empire like the local imperial city, it cannot engage in actions deviating from the established legal framework. Under no circumstances does the council intend to deviate from the obligations imposed by the laws. Based on this principle, the council's stance against continued detention is not a specific severity, but aligns with the standard procedural order, which, in all circumstances, abides by the necessity of the law. The application of this procedure in the current scenario is subject to scrutiny by a foreign judicial body, which will independently review the case files and make its determination. According to these principles, the Council perceives that Reuss's action isn't solely attributable to the altered circumstances at present, but rather to the positions held by those involved. Moreover, it appears less inclined in this instance to prevent a legal judgment due to political concerns arising from the hostile French incursion. This stance contradicts their assurances of impartial justice and seems influenced by public pressure. In the most glorious government, Your Majesty has given too much and clear evidence of how little you may be in the power of a magistrate to intervene directly and judiciously of the judges. Except for the justification of these principles in the present case, according to which, in my last letter, further details are the same. In light of the esteemed sympathy expressed by Hochwohlgeboren towards the local affairs, I humbly seek forgiveness. There was a particular plea presented to Hochwohlgeboren during his admission to legal caution, requesting that he would not be released without permission and would abide by the legal decisions that might be rendered. In immediate compliance with this plea, provisional liberation from imprisonment has been promptly relinquished. I will consider myself exceptionally fortunate if the swift compliance with this resolution by the Council, exhibiting profound respect towards the highest royal proclamation, is also acknowledged as an expression of unreserved reverence and devotion. With utmost honour and respect, I remain insistent. March 1793. The handling of this matter by the Frankfurt Council was evidently cautious and deliberate. However, it's notable that a crucial point wasn't emphasized enough, which held significant weight. Reuss fired only after the French soldiers had disarmed themselves, rendering his action considerably grave as he shot at defenseless individuals. The legal proceedings concluded with a provisional release due to Reuss's severe illness, which unfortunately didn't improve. He was admitted to Senckenberg Hospital, where his condition, diagnosed as pulmonary dyspnea, worsened and ultimately proved incurable. As a result, the appointment of a legal defender was prohibited. Reuss passed away in March 1794. Certainly, revisiting the war event is important to acknowledge the merits achieved, especially by the Hessians and the citizens of Frankfurt during that period. Their actions and contributions deserve recognition at the highest level. The storming of Frankfurt by the Hessians was the only one, though not, as a contemporary has said, the most brilliant vigour in the entire campaign of 1792, and as Hessian rightly said, following a period of methodical slowness that missed prime opportunities and subdued warlike confidence, it was truly refreshing to witness the resurfacing of the boldness of seasoned soldiers and the indomitable courage of earlier times, prevailing over methodical strategies to secure victory. The small yet valiant unit under the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel stood out among the smaller armies of that era for its robust martial spirit, expertise, and military heritage. Even after the setbacks witnessed in the unfortunate Champagne campaign, as noted by Prussian officers, this contingent remained committed to its military ethos, serving as an example of unyielding perseverance and steadfastness, factors that deterred other troops from wavering in the face of war. During that period, the Hessians earned the moniker of the German Spartans. In 1792, it wasn't just the officers and regular soldiers of the Hessian Corps deserving of commendation. The residents of Hessen land residing in towns and villages also demonstrated noteworthy valor and contributions. The proclamation by the French on October 28th, demanding the conversion of the soldiers of the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, instigated significant resentment among the Hessian populace. The prevailing sentiment and its fundamental cause were encapsulated profoundly by a representative from Hessen. His words describing the Hessian spirit with vivacious colours may therefore be repeated here. For a century and a half, our people's lives were intricately woven with our army. Across several generations, the strength and vitality of our landscape were united under a singular banner. Grandsons shared honours with the same banner their fathers upheld with their virtue. In our Hessian homeland, family, community, and camaraderie forged an unbreakable alliance. What affected our army reverberated most profoundly among our people. Truly, where in our local abodes could one discover a dwelling untouched by the footsteps of a warrior? How many roofs sheltered the weathered ancestor, whose blood was shed at Rocourt and Lohfeld, on the victorious fields of Minden and Krefeld? Even in the face of defeat, as the Indian's arrow pierced the air on the banks of Delaware, their legacy remained glorious. These stories, donned in the garb of warriors, stood as noble examples for their grandsons to emulate. The resonance of that French appeal sparked a fervour across Hesse. Wherever it was displayed by their propagandists, 100 hands extended to rip it down, to trample it underfoot. From the bustling lowlands to the solitary valleys nestled amidst forested mountains, a shared resolve emerged, to arm themselves without weapons and brace for the imminent confrontation with the invading enemy. The roads leading from the Rhine and Main regions into the heart of Germany were teeming with anxious refugees, while in Hesse, a remarkable transformation unfolded. Throughout the villages, rural folk converted scythes into warlike halberds and flails into morning stars. Weathered veterans, adorned in their reinstated ceremonial attire, instructed the younger generation in wielding and adorning these makeshift weapons. News of the advancing enemy fueled an exultant and fierce fighting spirit among the populace, growing ever more resolute as the threat drew closer. The unity, love for their homeland, and shared investment in the soldiers' deeds and fates became evident in Hesse after the events of the 2nd of December. Everywhere, there was an effort to assist wounded fellow citizens and support the families of fallen warriors. This care extended beyond the Landgrave's involvement. Even in the most remote villages, there was a collective effort. Some parishes, particularly those in the immediate vicinity, swiftly sent provisions to Frankfurt in solidarity. The generosity extended even to remote areas. For instance, in a Flemish village far from Schmalkalden, significant and partly impoverished residents contributed a thaler each to the 25 village comrades who participated in the battle. Poultry and cakes were sent to the hospital in Frankfurt, especially around Christmas. In the Hessian village of Bergen, located about a mile and a half from Frankfurt, a baker prepared numerous apple cakes immediately after the storm. Alongside his wife and child, he delivered these cakes, along with a bottle of apple wine, to the soldiers of the Guard Grenadier Regiment stationed in Bergen's quarters. He encountered soldiers who seemed to be overwhelmed by the care they were receiving from the people of Frankfurt, and expressed their gratitude in loud appreciation. Eventually he managed to reach the hussars stationed at the Bockenheimer gate, ensuring that his intended gift for Hesse remained within its bounds. The hussars welcomed him with heartfelt gratitude, and in return they gifted him a captured horse, which he proudly rode back to Bergen. The bravery displayed by the Hessians is quite remarkable. When the French sent roaming patrols to Hanau in October, they encountered armed resistance from the inhabitants in the villages along their path. Similarly, the gates and towers of many towns, still surrounded by walls, were actively defended against their approach. The villagers of Marktkobel responded to the French patrols seeking entry with mockery. They quipped that if the French had managed to conquer the fortress of Mainz so easily, they should try their luck conquering Marktkobel with the same ease. Similarly, a tailor from the Hessian village of Budesheim displayed remarkable bravery. Joining the 1st Guard Battalion and unarmed, he advanced with the storming column during the attack on the Friedberg Gate. Merrily swinging his truss over his head, he was among the first to enter the gate. Further, on the day before the planned storming, all the troops designated for the assault received the news with jubilation. Even the Prussian king's visit to their encampments was met with enthusiastic cheers. They readied themselves for the impending storm as if preparing for a parade. Remarkably, even those who were ill pleaded with their officers to allow them to participate. Examples of such courage and patriotism among the Hessians cannot be overlooked without acknowledging an illustrious chapter in their history, an episode that stands as one of the most glorious in the annals of this nation and shines brightly in the history of Germany. At that time, Prince Hermann of Hesse played a vital role during his time as the administrator and later elector of the Archdiocese of Köln. He was supported by his brother, Landgrave Henry III of Hesse, who not only dispatched 1,000 infantry and 500 cavalry to assist, but later arrived with a force of 15,000 men. Initially, the 1,500 troops were employed as defenders of the city of Neuss, a focal point in the struggle. Neuss was besieged by Charles the Bold, commanding an army of 60,000 of the era's finest soldiers. When the Landgrave arrived with his men, they couldn't breach the city's defences but established their camp at an advantageous position nearby. From there, they attempted to support the besieged city by shooting letters encased in hollow arrows to communicate with them. Despite their efforts, they were unable to break the Burgundian siege. The 1,500 Hessian troops inside Neuss displayed unparalleled resilience. Despite overwhelming odds, they heroically defended the city against all attempts by the besieging forces to force their surrender. This lasted nearly a year, from July 29th, 1474, to June 17th, 1475. As supplies dwindled, they even resorted to consuming horsemeat when all other provisions were exhausted. The determination of the Hessian troops was remarkable. Despite enduring 56 attacks over the 11-month period, the siege tactics shifted to a blockade to starve the city. Devastation ensued. 700 fortress towers were demolished, 300 houses razed, one arm of the Rhine dammed, and smaller rivers diverted. Charles the Bold, leading 60,000 men, relentlessly attempted to break the resolve of the 1,500 Hessians. He was so involved in the siege that he hadn't changed his clothes for over 10 months. Yet the undeterred Hessian fortitude remained unshaken. The commitment and endurance displayed by both Charles the Bold's forces and the defenders of Neuss, particularly the Hessians, mark a pivotal moment in history. Charles's determination to take Neuss faced insurmountable resistance, leading to his eventual withdrawal in the face of the imperial army's arrival. The toll was significant, with losses numbering at least 15,000 men before Charles withdrew. This event serves as a testament to the steadfastness of the defenders and the resilience of the city against overwhelming odds. The defence of the city of Neuss by the Hessians deserves to be refreshed in the memory of the German nation. If the French, who are far more glorious than we are, had accomplished such a feat, their memory would be glorified again and again in their schools and cultural narratives. The citizens of Frankfurt showcased remarkable resilience and demeanour amid the French capture of their city in December 1792. Despite the surprise takeover, they maintained a resolute and welcoming attitude toward the unanticipated guests. Even amidst challenging circumstances and intense political fervour during negotiations with Custine, they upheld a diplomatic and composed stance. Their adept navigation of this delicate situation, marked by equanimity and hospitality, deserves acknowledgment for their unwavering strength in adversity. The provided evidence includes statements from the magistrate and their representatives, alongside a letter from the castle's master Auerbach, dated November 23rd. Additionally, there's an address signed by all artisans to Custine on November 5th. Moreover, there's a report documenting the French attempt to establish liberty trees in Frankfurt, reminiscent of the successful attempts in Mainz and the adjacent Castell. These liberty trees consisted of small trees adorned with the symbolic red freedom cap, planted in the ground as a visible representation of the movement. The attempted replication of liberty trees in Frankfurt, akin to those in Mainz, didn't find success. Despite people dancing around them and Custine's military music and wine-drinking ceremonies by these trees, the experiment failed to resonate in Frankfurt. When Custine ventured into Sachsenhausen during his initial visit, he inquired if they desired a tree for their forest. The response from the suburb's inhabitants was notably cold and indifferent, expressing that if he desired a tree, he could arrange it himself. Additionally, Frankfurters in general ridiculed the popular freedom trees from Mainz. Among these voices, a Jewish resident remarked on these trees being akin to a tree without roots and a cap without a head. Consequently, Custine refrained from erecting a freedom tree in Frankfurt. The philanthropic actions undertaken by Frankfurt in 1792, coupled with the astute conduct of the magistrate and the bourgeoisie in challenging times, stand far higher in merit than these negative incidents. Several instances have been highlighted already, and a few more can complement these commendable acts. During the Hessian invasion on the 2nd of December, when tradespeople began pursuing the fleeing Frenchmen, 3 citizens, Notary Jennecke, Court Judge Weil, and physician Dr. Ehrmann, united to prevent this pursuit. Others stationed themselves in front of their houses, appealing to the embittered Hessian troops for protection for the defeated French, or sheltered these enemies, even though hated by all, within their homes to shield them from the initial fury. During this period, aid and relief were extended even to the wounded enemies. Substantial written testimonies from a significant portion of captured French officers and soldiers, dated December 5th, 6th, and 10th, corroborate these actions. Special attention was devoted to the care of the wounded Hessians. The magistrate promptly allocated a considerable sum for their meals, mandated all city surgeons to remain on duty, and directed the wounded Hessians to be accommodated at the Senckenberg hospital, typically intended for citizens. A women's club promptly organized under the guidance of distinguished ladies to attend to the wounded in every possible manner. Additionally, the inhabitants amassed a considerable collection of shirts, sheets, stockings, wine, and food in abundance, both for their compatriots and for the French adversaries. The surplus of donations became overwhelming after a few days, prompting the hospital chief to request a cessation of additional contributions due to the overflowing quantities received. The gratitude expressed by a Hessian soldier echoes the ongoing appreciation for the generosity of the Frankfurters. His words resonate with appreciation. The citizens of Frankfurt supported us, reciprocating our aid against the French, offering us wine, beer, schnapps, and food, which we always found invaluable. The surplus funds collected for the wounded exceeded the required amount, prompting the distribution of the excess among the prisoners. Furthermore, concerts, balls, and theatrical performances were organized to support the injured Hessians and aid the widows and orphans of the survivors. These events became annual commemorations on the anniversary of December 2nd. Regarding civilian involvement in the conflict with the French, a meticulous inquiry was conducted by the magistrate. 62 locals and wounded French individuals were interrogated as witnesses. The French interviewees implicated only 3 civilians in causing harm, whereas the investigated residents identified those previously mentioned and a city soldier who had engaged with the French troops. The civilian was not found guilty of inflicting wounds, but rather detained an enemy pursued by 3 Hessian horsemen. Responding to their summons, he had drawn his sabres until the riders caught up and incapacitated the enemy. He received a punishment of 25 beatings with a stick. The conduct of the citizens of Frankfurt and their authorities in the latter half of 1792 garnered widespread recognition across Germany. During the celebration of the December 2nd, 1792 anniversary in Hessen, while recounting the assault on Frankfurt, the author remarked, "If a German, devoted to his fatherland from another region, wishes to join our gathering, he should receive a fraternal handshake, and if he happens to be a Frankfurter, grant him the place of honor ahead of all." On December 23, 1793, the King of Prussia, acknowledging the vital role played by the citizens of Frankfurt, directed their magistrate to extend gratitude to his cabinet councillors. This action stemmed from the city's robust and unwavering support for the troops engaged in battles on the left bank of the Rhine, a testament to the generosity and commitment of its people. The letter conveyed, "His Majesty the King takes immense pleasure in recognizing the outstanding, noble and philanthropic efforts of the citizens of the imperial city. Their commendable contributions to bolster the royal troops in the field through voluntary means have been received with great appreciation. We have been expressly commanded to convey in the name of His Majesty to the esteemed lords and citizens of this locality the deepest gratitude for their active demonstration of remarkable patriotism, which shall be held in everlasting gracious memory. We are directed to ensure their enjoyment and to provide evident testimony of their protective and generous benevolence toward the well-disposed inhabitants in future circumstances. While we dismiss the highest commission regarding these matters, we earnestly urge the masters to disseminate the sentiments expressed in this missive, perpetuating their commitment to good citizenship. By order of the King of Prussia, Secret Councillors Haugwitz, Alvensleben." Additionally, a letter from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe signifies the widespread acknowledgement bestowed upon Frankfurt for its conduct during that period. This letter from Frankfurt's esteemed native son stands as an honorary tribute to his birthplace. To grasp the significance, it's essential to note that on September 19, 1792, Goethe's uncle, Senator Johann Jost Textor, passed away. Constitutional regulations prohibited an uncle and his nephew from serving as councillors concurrently, leading to the potential for Goethe's election to the council. The decision had been made to proceed accordingly, and in the appointment of a council, 3 individuals had to be elected and determined by lot. Goethe's mother took it upon herself to inquire of her son, and on the 24th of December, he provided the following response. "It saddens me deeply that circumstances have forced my return from Dusseldorf, via Paderborn and Kassel to Weimar, dashing the hope of reuniting with you, dear mother, and my beloved friends in Frankfurt. I have carried immense concern for you all this time. The situation facing my fellow citizens weighs heavily on my heart. Their conduct in such critical times has been nothing short of admirable. The question of accepting a councillor's office is both flattering and significant. To be born a citizen of Frankfurt is an honour that reflects positively not just in Europe, but throughout the world. The enduring memory and appreciation shown by the friends of my youth, considering me to partake in the city's administration at such a crucial time, is a sign I deeply cherish. The letter I received amidst the chaos of war brought both melancholy moments and a glimmer of hope to revisit my beloved hometown sooner than expected. I had hoped to express my gratitude in person for the tremendous honor bestowed upon me. However, I find myself in a challenging and genuine situation that I must convey to you with honesty and care. With an unyielding attachment that every fortunate individual holds for their homeland, it's a heartfelt refusal to decline a role that any citizen would willingly embrace, especially during these times, were it not for my present favorable circumstances. My acceptance would be in their favor. His Highness the Duke has shown me unparalleled kindness over the years, for which I am deeply indebted. To leave my responsibilities at a time when the loyal servant's duty calls most urgently would be the height of ingratitude. I humbly express my heartfelt thanks to the esteemed gentlemen who have shown such friendly sentiments toward me. Please accept my sincerest gratitude and continue to place your trust in me in the future. When circumstances permit, I eagerly look forward to expressing in person and in detail what this letter might not fully convey. Until then, may the concerns of my esteemed compatriots recede, and may the desired peace return to us all soon.